Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to have part 2 of our Chicago Building Decarb conversation today with our amazing environmental justice advocates who are working on this really important piece of legislation. So today for this conversation, we'll have Courtney and Yessenia from Southeast Side Groups, People for Community Recovery and Southeast Environmental Task Force. Thanks so much for joining today, guys, for part 2.
Excited to be back. Thanks for having us.
Awesome.
Yeah, excited too.
So let's just get to it. I mean, I think we want everyone to know a little bit more about what you all are working on. And so can you kind of describe for our listeners what how our environmental justice community is leading this building decarbonization work in Chicago? Either one could answer.
Sure, I can start and then Yessenia can chime in. So environmental justice communities are part of several spaces, including working with the city on how to reach their climate goals through many different means, including building decarbonization. And we have a really important role because we know that building decarbonization has to happen for the city to meet their climate goals, and they could do it in a way that doesn't actually really benefit our communities and get it done. And so we're lucky in a sense that they do want to hear from us. And what that means is lots of meetings, lots of conversations, educating our communities about what this even is and how it could help goals that we already have around things like workforce and jobs, addressing health disparities, addressing energy affordability, which is a really big issue, especially now as it's getting colder. And so we're really, getting ideas from residents and then working with other advocates and city officials to say, this is what we need, and let's figure out how to make it happen. And those conversations can be tricky, but when decision makers and advocates are supportive of policies that center equity, it's a little bit easier to at least get our foot in the door and explore what that looks like and kind of like non-traditional means of reaching these goals that will have the benefits that we want to see.
Awesome. So as I'm learning about this work, because this isn't the stuff that I work on day to day, I hear like a lot of terminology that I'm still not familiar with. And so hopefully we can kind of demystify that in our conversation today. So, environmental justice groups in Chicago are currently advocating for building performance standard, BPS, that is inclusive of all buildings in low income communities and communities of color. Can you explain what a BPS is and why it's crucial that any standard the city introduces centers equity?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that one since we're asking for simplified definitions. So a building performance standard essentially is, you can kind of take the name at face value, but it's a standard by which the buildings within the city are required to operate by. So whether that be with the number of emissions that they're letting loose, energy efficiency, things of that nature. And a BPS is so important to this policy specifically because, as Courtney mentioned with that first question, that the city is able to reach its climate goals if they were to just focus on new buildings and new construction. But a BPS is so important to marginalized communities because, of course, our communities don't see a whole lot of that, a lot of new development. We are dependent on seeing climate equity come to fruition based upon the buildings that we already have within our communities. So if the city mandates this performance standard for them to operate by, then it allows us to be part of that that positive change.
Amazing. Now I know what people are talking about. And I hear that. So thank you so much for clarifying that. What are you hoping the impact of this policy will be in Chicago? Either one of you can answer that.
So the reason that we're working on this and we support it is because we're hopeful that a strong building performance standard and sort of like larger suite of decarb policies will address some of the issues I mentioned before. So workforce development, there's not a ton of new jobs in our communities, and folks are having to commute a really long way to get to work without ample public transportation. So bringing local jobs and training is really important. And these policies could help do that. Additionally, we hope it lowers overall energy burden, or the percentage of a family's income that they spend on their utility bills. And we also hope that it has positive health impacts. So we know that having natural gas infrastructure in a home is really bad for indoor air quality. And on the southeast side, our outdoor air quality is also pretty terrible. And so we're hoping that these policies help address some of that and have positive health impacts. I also just want to mention, in terms of the discussion around building performance standards, like these are our vision and our goals, and these are the things we want to get to. And there's also a lot of potential unintended consequences that we want to avoid. And I think those are also important to talk about, because if we're not careful, we could unintentionally sort of penalize owners of naturally occurring affordable housing who maybe can't afford to do the upgrades to the building that need to happen in order to comply. And then either they have to sell the building or go into further debt. And so we don't want this policy to spur gentrification in a negative way or like penalize anybody, but we also want to make sure that those who need these resources the most are first in line. So it's a little bit tricky, but again, that's why community leaders need to be involved in these discussions. And so I think additionally, I hope that this sort of creates a pipeline of leaders who are going to stay involved through implementation, because we also know that a law is only as good as how it gets rolled out. And so my hope is also that the folks that are engaged now can be compensated to stay engaged and really see this through to make sure that their communities are getting the benefits that we want to see.
Yeah, there's so much nuance to this, and it's really important that there's that on the ground expertise that you and Yessenia are bringing forward. And I think this is kind of like a call to action, that there's plenty of seats at the table for this work. And in order for this to be done in the right way, we need to hear that community expertise. So this is amazing. Thank you so much for all of your work. Is there any last things either one of you would like to add? Otherwise, I've learned so much today. Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much. And this is not the last that we will be hearing about building decarbonization in Chicago as this moves forward for this, equitable, clean, green, beautiful Chicago that we want. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye, y'all.